Actually, I like Synthpunk. He's a good musician and he makes funny videos. I just happen to disagree with his opinion about modular synths. I'm J. Daniel Kramer, and today I just wanted to make a short video describing why I think that Mr. Punk doesn't get it when it comes to modular synths. In his hilarious video poking fun at modular synths and the nerds like me who play them, I think that Mr. Synthpunk is really just making one big straw man argument. In other words, he's describing modular synths incorrectly and then using all those incorrect assumptions about them to cast them in a negative light. So I wanted to take a look at three main aspects of his argument in the hopes of shedding some light about what modular synths really are and of course what they are not. But first, a quick note about some of the music that we're listening to. In the background, we're listening to my piece Morning Dove, created on a large modular system, and everything that you're hearing, the birds, the rain, and even the morning dove itself, are created using a modular synthesizer. My first concern with the Synthpunk video is the way that he compares modular synths to their cousins, keyboard synthesizers. There's lots of different keyboards available. They do all kinds of different things, from simple pianos and organs all the way up to complex polyphonic synths and workstations. But there really are no modular synths that are designed to be directly comparable to those. In his video, he complains that modular synths are expensive and cumbersome, and it takes a long time to patch them and you're having to deal with all these cables. But essentially it would be much easier to just have a keyboard synth where everything is built in and you can call up presets. And this is where I disagree. Modular synths of any type are not designed to compete with keyboard synths. It's a completely different paradigm, it's a different way of making sounds, and even if there's overlap in those sounds, it's a whole different world when it comes to music making. It's a very experiential way of working, and it's a lot different than simply calling up presets or changing sounds on a synthesizer and then playing chords and scales and melodies on that synth. Modular systems can be much more immediate. Once you've got the modular in front of you, it can be much quicker to patch in, change routings, and set up complex modulations than you could ever do on any kind of keyboard synthesizer like a Moog 1 or a Prophet. And in almost all cases, we can get even very simple modular synths to do things that regular keyboard synths simply aren't capable of. When we perform with modular synths, we're often playing them in completely different ways. We're not just playing keyboard music like we might on a piano or an organ. The synthesizer is more part of the music making, and we've created an environment in which the music happens, sometimes without any of our intervention, but sometimes we're coaxing it along and making changes to it. In my own compositions, I'll often create so-called generative patches. These are big complicated patches in which the modular synth is actually generating the music from first principles, sometimes math, science, physics, logic. There can be all kinds of things going on. I often use chaotic and random structures. In the large-scale patches that I do, I can create full polyphonic, almost chamber music sounding output, and then my job is to conduct it as it goes, to make changes and to modulate aspects of the performance so that I'm pushing the music in certain ways, sometimes feeding it notes, changing keys, changing tempos, timbres, and dynamics. Here's dancer Danique Scipio and I performing live at Dutch Modular Fest this past fall. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. The full 30-minute album is available on my Bandcamp, and you can see the entire video on my YouTube channel.
Oh no, I must not be a real musician. Synthpunk says so. He says modular is for non-musicians. Oh, the humanity.
My next concern is that Synthpunk declares that modular is for non-musicians. This ad hominem attack is essentially the argument that because modular synths are so different from the kinds of usual keyboard synths that he's used to, then the people who are buying them and using them must not be musicians. This is a childishly simple argument in that not all music can be performed on a keyboard instrument. Not all music is in 4/4, not all music has basic chords and diatonic scales. There's lots of different kinds of music out there, and so of course there's lots of different kinds of musicians. And a lot of the artists that I know that are using modulars to create music are creating new music, classical music, all kinds of interesting soundscapes, and using modular in installations. By making this argument, Synthpunk is really just admitting that he doesn't listen to very much different music, that he's not very welcoming to different types of music, and so therefore doesn't see the kinds of people creating it as actually musicians. I really worry that arguments like this might cause modular users, especially young musicians and composers new to the craft, to doubt themselves, to wonder if they are really legitimate musicians and if they're really creating legitimate music if they're doing so on a modular instrument. This is probably a good time to point out that we've been listening to Samuel Barber's famous Adagio for strings, painfully recreated on my own modular system, string by string, track by track. First I started by recreating the score, converting it to MIDI, adding control changes that would output voltages that would control the timbres of the oscillators, and then creating two simultaneous concurrent synth voices, one with wavetables and one more analog based, that would respond to all this MIDI information for each single string part, and then multi-track recording of the whole thing, and then mixing it all together to get the final result. But what do I know? Apparently I'm not a musician. And lastly, Synthpunk takes exception with the sound of some modular music, referring to modular music as bleeps and bloops, and insulting it for not really being music at all, seems to be his strategy for trying to convince his viewers that modular synths are a poor investment. This is a lot like his argument that people who use modular synths aren't real musicians, or aren't musicians at all. Once again, all that's really going on is that Mr. Punk is betraying a real lack of understanding of the breadth, width, and history involved in music making. Interesting new timbres, new sounds, new voicings, scales, transitions, transpositions have been going on in music for hundreds of years. And in terms of creating music from found sounds and electronically sourced sounds, we're getting to the point where that kind of composition is almost 100 years old. Mr. Punk seems to be blissfully unaware of the huge history of new music and its implications for electronic music. Creating music that's made up of electronic sounds is a lot harder than it looks. It's a time-consuming process, and the composer needs to be very, very much aware of making changes throughout the time span of this piece of music. It is essentially changing those sounds and morphing and modulating them in interesting ways that catches the listener's ears and starts to tell a story and create a viable narrative of the composer's voice. For my 2017 work, The Right, available on my Bandcamp page, I traveled to the jungles of Cuba with social workers and participated in an indigenous giving ceremony over the uncovered skeletal remains of a tribal chieftain approximately 2,000 years old. I created the piece of music to capture the sense of the jungle and to capture the sense of history and ancient culture that we were participating in. The piece is largely made up of modulated sounds, timbres, atonal, and generative. The modular synthesizer not only creates all the sounds, but it cycles through various mixes and will capture parts of the music and repeat it to create a sense of thematic development throughout the piece. Let's have a listen. Synthpunk complains that modular music sounds like a bunch of random bleeps and bloops, but really it's all about the composer's preference. In my upcoming release entitled Full English Breakfast, recorded on location in London, I'm using generative patching to create a 5-part polyphonic, multi-movement work of chamber music. The modular instrument allows me to perform all 5 of these parts simultaneously and controlling rhythmic and percussive parts with my mouth. Let's have a listen to an excerpt from Movement 2. And let's have a listen to a small section of the 6th movement, which demonstrates the melodies and counterparts that synthpunk says are so absent from modular patching and modular music making. So in conclusion, I just want to say that I don't really think Mr. Synthpunk hates Modular that much. I think he's just having some fun with us, and he wants to sell some of his t-shirts. But I can't help thinking that he doesn't really get it. He doesn't understand exactly what modular synths are, or how much they could benefit his own music making. And for the rest of us, it's okay to keep using our modular synths. So grab a fistful of day-glow patch cables, a soldering iron, and some circuit boards, put on your lab coat and your nerd glasses, and start building yourself the biggest, craziest modular synth you can think of. And then patch up some weird chaos oscillations and purling noise to make a gigantic generative patch. Because it's all just music, folks. And as long as you're happy making it, we'll be happy listening to it. So patch on, nerds, patch on.